Stop scrolling. Because if you are reading these words right now, this is not coincidence, not algorithm, not chance, but a signal responding to your frequency, and before your logical mind tries to dismiss that thought, pause and feel the subtle recognition moving through your chest, the quiet familiarity that says, I've heard this before, somewhere beyond time. And if you've ever felt different, watch the world unfold with a sense that something vast was missing from the story you were given, then this message is for you. Whether you're in New York or London, Berlin or Paris, whether it's dawn or midnight, because this transmission crosses borders and time zones and lands only where it is meant to land. And if this resonates even slightly, subscribe now, not later, not after the video, not when the mind interferes, but now, because subscribing is not just clicking a button. It's an energetic declaration that you are ready to remember, ready to receive, ready to activate what has been dormant. And as you subscribe, you align yourself with a stream of guidance that continues beyond this moment, beyond this story, into the unfolding chapters of your own awakening. And now that the door is open, let us begin. You were never meant to fully belong to this world as it is. And the first time you sensed that truth, you were probably young, standing in a classroom, a church, a crowded street, or staring at the night sky from a bedroom window, wondering why reality felt staged, why people moved as if following invisible scripts while something inside you watched from a deeper distance. And that distance was not disconnection but memory, because long before this lifetime you existed as consciousness beyond form, aligned with stellar civilizations that did not worship time but navigated it, and among them were the Arcturians, architects of harmonic intelligence, guardians of quantum coherence, whose messages were never spoken in words but encoded as frequencies carried through light. And when Earth entered its current acceleration cycle, an era you know as chaos, polarization, collapse, and rebirth, those frequencies were seeded into human consciousness, embedding themselves within certain souls whose nervous systems could hold higher bandwidths of awareness. And these souls became known as Starseeds, not as a title but as a function, living bridges between dimensions, and you are one of them. Though the remembering did not come easily, because the density of Earth required forgetting, required compression, required the soul to fold itself into biology, into identity, into survival, and so you lived your life searching for meaning, for truth, for something unnamed, moving through relationships that mirrored fragments of yourself, careers that never fully satisfied, spiritual paths that hinted but did not complete the picture, until the pressure built, until the old structures of belief began to crack. And that cracking was not failure but activation, because consciousness expands through rupture, and the moment you feel lost is often the moment you are closest to alignment. And here is the first twist you were never told. Awakening is not about becoming something new. It is about allowing what you already are to override the illusion you were trained to maintain. And as that override begins, quantum reality responds, because reality is not fixed but participatory, shaped by perception, attention, and coherence. And the Arcturian wisdom embedded in your field begins to pulse, subtly at first, then unmistakably, showing up as synchronicities, repeating numbers, vivid dreams, sudden emotional releases, and an unshakable sense that your life is accelerating toward something you cannot yet name but can already feel. The activation deepens when you stop asking what is happening to me and start asking what is happening through me, because this is where the narrative turns, where the seeker becomes the conduit, and you begin to realize that your thoughts are not just internal dialogue but instructions to the quantum field, that emotion is not weakness but fuel, and that consciousness is not trapped inside the brain but extending outward, interfacing with layers of reality that respond instantaneously when alignment is achieved. And this is where higher self-activation truly begins, not as a dramatic lightning strike, but as a steady reclaiming of authorship over your inner state. And as you align with your higher self, You feel guided without being controlled, certain without rigid belief, and sensitive without fragility. And the Arcturian message becomes clearer now, not as an external voice, but as an inner knowing that whispers stability first, expansion second, because unchecked awakening fractures the psyche, but grounded awakening rewrites the world. And here lies the second twist. Galactic energy does not descend to save humanity, it rises through those who can hold it without losing themselves. And that is why your life has demanded resilience, why you have survived things that should have broken you, why your nervous system learned to endure intensity, because soul alignment requires capacity, and capacity is built through experience. And as your quantum consciousness stabilizes, manifestation shifts from effort to inevitability, because when inner coherence is achieved, reality reorganizes to match it. People appear, paths open, obstacles dissolve, and yet the final illusion falls away when you realize this power was never meant for personal gain alone, because Starseed awakening is collective by design, and every moment you choose clarity over fear, compassion over reaction, presence over distraction, you transmit a signal that others receive without knowing why. And this is how the new world forms quietly, invisibly, beneath the noise of collapsing systems, guided not by rulers or institutions, but by aligned souls remembering who they are. And as this chapter closes, understand this clearly: you are not reading a story, you are inside one, and the next activation does not come from these words, but from what you choose to do with the awareness they have already unlocked. As the integration phase unfolds, you begin to notice something unsettling yet liberating. The old world no longer reacts to you the same way. Conversations feel thinner, distractions louder, superficial urgency almost painful, and this is not because you are rising above others, but because your frequency has shifted beyond certain agreements you once unconsciously signed. And this is where many awakeners panic, mistaking separation for loneliness, not realizing that what is dissolving is resonance, not love, and the Arcturian guidance intensifies here, reminding you that expansion always passes through a void, a threshold where the familiar cannot follow. And in this void, your relationship with reality becomes intimate, almost transparent, because the veil between intention and outcome thins, and you see clearly how fear collapses timelines while trust stabilizes them. And here comes the third twist. Quantum activation does not amplify only light, it amplifies everything: unresolved wounds, suppressed emotions, shadow aspects you once buried under productivity or spirituality itself. And this is deliberate, because wholeness cannot be achieved by bypassing fragmentation, and so memories surface, grief rises without warning, anger demands acknowledgement, and instead of resisting you begin to witness, and witnessing is alchemy, because awareness reorganizes energy without force. And as you hold yourself through this unraveling, your nervous system recalibrates, learning that intensity does not equal danger, that sensation can move without becoming identity, and in this recalibration, your consciousness expands sideways rather than upward, anchoring into the body, into breath, into earth. Because Starseed embodiment is the mission hidden inside ascension, and as this anchoring deepens, you feel galactic energy flowing downward rather than away, integrating into action, communication, creativity, leadership, and subtle influence. And people begin to respond to you differently, not because you are trying to change them, but because coherence is persuasive, and without preaching or proving, you become a stabilizing node in unstable environments, a calm signal in chaotic systems. And this is how cosmic guidance expresses itself in human form, not through spectacle, but through presence that quietly reorganizes space. There comes a moment, subtle yet irreversible, when you realize you are no longer waiting for confirmation, no longer searching for signs, no longer asking whether this path is real, because the need for validation dissolves when inner authority activates, and this is higher self-embodiment rather than activation. The phase where guidance no longer arrives as flashes but as continuity, And the fourth twist reveals itself here. Enlightenment is not escape from humanity, but intimacy with it, an ability to see the divine pattern moving through conflict, contradiction, and collapse without losing compassion or clarity. And as your quantum consciousness stabilizes, time itself begins to feel elastic. Moments stretch when presence deepens, years compress when alignment accelerates, and you realize that manifestation is not about attracting outcomes, but about becoming the version of yourself that exists where those outcomes are natural. And this becoming requires responsibility, because awareness carries consequence, and every thought, word, and intention now echoes farther than before, shaping not only your personal timeline, but influencing the collective field. And this is why the Arcturian wisdom emphasizes restraint as much as expansion, teaching that true power moves quietly, sustainably, in harmony with larger systems rather than against them. And as soul alignment completes another cycle, you sense your role clarifying, not as a savior, not as a teacher above others, but as a signal holder, a frequency stabilizer, someone who walks between worlds while fully inhabiting this one. And the story does not conclude with answers, but with capacity, the capacity to remain open without fragmentation, grounded without stagnation, visionary without dissociation. And as this chapter closes, understand this final truth for now: the awakening you thought was happening to you is now happening through you, and the universe is responding accordingly, not with applause or revelation, but with opportunity disguised as ordinary moments where your presence alone alters the outcome. At this stage of the journey, the awakening no longer feels like an event, but like a climate you live inside, a constant atmospheric shift that follows you into ordinary moments, grocery stores, commutes, conversations, silence. And this is where the deepest recalibration occurs, because the mind expects transcendence to feel elevated and dramatic. Yet what arrives instead is simplicity sharpened to clarity. And the fifth twist emerges quietly. The more conscious you become, the less fragmented your identity needs to be, and roles you once clung to dissolve without loss, revealing an underlying coherence that was always there. And this coherence allows you to perceive multiple layers of reality at once, not as hallucination or fantasy, but as intuitive knowing, an ability to sense emotional undercurrents, energetic dynamics, and probability fields without effort. And this is quantum consciousness embodied, not floating above life, but threading through it. And the Arcturian message now emphasizes stewardship, because expanded awareness without ethical alignment destabilizes systems, and you begin to feel a natural aversion to manipulation, domination, or unconscious influence, even subtle forms you once tolerated, and instead you find yourself choosing transparency, resonance, and truth, even when they are inconvenient. And this choice refines your frequency further, aligning your soul not just with galactic energy but with planetary intelligence, Earth herself responding as you ground higher light into matter. And you may notice an increased sensitivity to nature, to sound, to collective emotion, because your nervous system has become an antenna rather than a shield. And here lies the paradox. Sensitivity becomes strength when it is integrated, and as you integrate, your presence begins to catalyze shifts in others without instruction, without effort, sometimes even without interaction, simply by holding a stable signal in shared space. And this is where manifestation becomes subtle and precise, no longer driven by desire alone, but by alignment with what serves the greater pattern. And you realize that some things you once wanted fall away, not because they are impossible, but because they no longer match who you are becoming. And this release is not loss but liberation, creating space for expressions of purpose that feel inevitable rather than aspirational. Eventually you reach a point where the question, "Why am I here?" stops echoing in your mind, not because it has been answered in words, but because it has been embodied in action, rhythm, and choice. And this is the phase of quiet service, where starseed awakening matures into contribution without self-erasure, and the sixth twist reveals itself here. The most powerful transformations rarely announce themselves. They integrate so seamlessly that they appear ordinary to those who have not crossed the threshold, and yet everything you touch carries more coherence, more presence, more clarity than before. And the Arcturian wisdom flowing through you now is less about instruction and more about calibration, a continuous fine-tuning that keeps you aligned amid shifting collective timelines, because humanity itself is oscillating between fear-based contraction and consciousness-based expansion, and your role is not to force direction, but to remain stable enough that others can orient themselves unconsciously, and this stability is tested again and again through global events, personal challenges, emotional triggers, and moments where old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. But each time you choose awareness over reaction, the new baseline locks in deeper, and you realize that awakening is not a peak you fall from, but a floor that rises beneath you. And from this foundation, you can engage fully with life, relationships, creativity, leadership, rest, without losing alignment. And as quantum reality continues to respond to your coherence, opportunities arise that feel strangely timed, encounters that seem orchestrated, paths that open exactly when readiness meets necessity, and you understand now that cosmic guidance has never overridden free will, it has only amplified clarity, and as this chapter closes, the final recognition settles in. You are not waiting for the future to arrive, because the future you came here to seed is already expressing itself through your choices, your presence, your embodiment of consciousness in a world learning, slowly but inevitably, to remember itself. By the time you arrive at this phase, something irreversible has settled into your being, a quiet certainty that no longer seeks explanation, because the mind has finally relinquished its role as gatekeeper and accepted its new function as translator. And this is where the deepest layer of starseed awakening activates, not as revelation, but as remembrance woven into every breath, and the seventh twist unfolds slowly. You begin to perceive how deeply programmed the collective reality truly is, not as a conspiracy in the dramatic sense, but as an inherited architecture of perception built on repetition, fear, and fragmentation. And rather than reacting with anger or urgency, you experience compassion mixed with clarity, because you can now see the mechanics without being trapped inside them, and this grants you an unusual freedom, the ability to move through systems without being consumed by them, to participate without surrendering sovereignty, and to engage without losing self. And as this freedom stabilizes, your relationship with time transforms again, not only stretching and compressing, but revealing parallel currents of possibility running alongside each decision. And you begin to feel the weight and elegance of choice, how one conscious pause can redirect an entire sequence of events. And this awareness does not paralyze you, it refines you, sharpening intuition into something nearly instantaneous, where the body responds before thought, guiding you away from distortion and toward coherence. And here, the Arcturian presence becomes almost tactile, not as an external guide but as a harmonic resonance within your field, a stabilizing intelligence reminding you to move slowly when energy is high and decisively when clarity is complete. And this balance is crucial, because the more activated you become, the more influence your state of being carries, and this influence is not hierarchical but field-based, affecting environments, relationships, and even collective moods without direct intention. And you may notice that conflicts de-escalate in your presence, that conversations take unexpected turns toward honesty, that people reveal truths they did not plan to share. And this is not because you are doing anything special, but because coherence invites truth to surface. And as this continues, another layer dissolves, the need to define yourself through spiritual identity, labels, or narratives, because the awakened self does not need reinforcement. And here lies the paradox that few teachings articulate. The more aligned you become, the less you need to talk about alignment, the less you need to convince, convert, or correct, and instead your life becomes the transmission. And this transmission is subtle but persistent, threading through the collective like a stabilizing code. And yet this phase is not without challenge, because with expanded perception comes the temptation to withdraw, to detach, to observe humanity from a distance rather than engaging with its density. And this is where soul alignment is tested at its deepest level, because the mission was never escape, it was integration, and the realization lands with gravity. You came not to avoid the world, but to meet it fully awake, fully embodied, fully present, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is slow, even when it resists change. And as you accept this, a new form of courage emerges, quieter than rebellion but stronger than compliance, a courage rooted in steadiness. And this steadiness becomes your signature, anchoring galactic energy into practical expression, into daily life, into decisions that ripple outward invisibly but irrevocably. And by the end of this chapter, you no longer wonder whether your awakening matters, because you can feel its impact not as validation, but as resonance moving through everything you touch. The final transformation in this cycle does not arrive with fireworks or prophecy, but with responsibility settling gently onto your shoulders, not as burden but as readiness. And this is where quantum consciousness matures into guardianship, the understanding that awareness is not passive observation, but active participation in the shaping of reality. And the eighth twist reveals itself here with profound simplicity. The universe does not ask you to save it, only to meet it without distortion. And this reframes everything you once believed about purpose, manifestation, and service, because you now recognize that every moment of internal coherence subtly reorganizes the collective field, and that small acts performed in alignment carry more weight than grand gestures born from ego or urgency. And as this realization integrates, your life simplifies even further, priorities reorder themselves effortlessly, and what remains is what truly matters: presence, integrity, creativity, connection, and rest, all held within a steady awareness that does not fluctuate wildly with circumstance. And this stability becomes increasingly rare in a world accelerating toward extremes, making your role more essential precisely because it is understated. And people may not recognize what you carry, but they feel it, sensing safety, clarity, or grounding without knowing why. And this is the quiet work of starseed embodiment, transmitting galactic wisdom not through language, but through regulated nervous systems, conscious choices, and compassionate boundaries. And as the Arcturian wisdom continues to flow through your awareness, it emphasizes sustainability over intensity, reminding you that consciousness expansion must be livable, repeatable, and integrated into human rhythms to truly serve. And this guidance helps you navigate moments of exhaustion, doubt, or overwhelm, not by suppressing them, but by honoring their message and recalibrating accordingly. And here the final illusion dissolves, the idea that awakening is a destination rather than a relationship, because consciousness is not something you achieve and keep. It is something you tend, like a field that responds to attention, care, and honesty. And as you tend it, quantum reality remains responsive, offering synchronicities not as proof, but as feedback, mirrors showing you where alignment is strong and where refinement is needed. And this feedback loop becomes your primary teacher, replacing external authority with lived wisdom. And from this place you engage the future differently, no longer fearing collapse or longing for transcendence, because you understand that evolution moves through cycles of breakdown and integration, and that you are equipped to navigate both. And as the chapter closes, one final recognition anchors itself deeply within you. The story you entered seeking answers has transformed into a life that is the answer. Not because it is perfect or complete, but because it is conscious, aligned, and actively participating in the unfolding of a reality where awakening is no longer rare, but quietly, steadily becoming the new foundation. As the final phase begins, you sense that nothing more needs to be added to you, no new frequency downloaded, no hidden code unlocked, because the journey has inverted itself, and now the work is subtraction rather than accumulation, a gentle unlayering of urgency, expectation, and the subtle need to become. And this is where the ninth twist arrives with quiet authority. Mastery is indistinguishable from humility because true quantum consciousness no longer seeks to alter reality to prove power, but meets reality as it is and transforms it through relationship. And this shift rewires how you experience challenge, because obstacles are no longer interpreted as resistance but as information, feedback revealing where alignment is still refining itself. And you move through these moments with patience rather than force, curiosity rather than judgment. And this patience is not passive, it is intelligent timing, an Arcturian principle often misunderstood by human urgency, teaching that coherence ripens outcomes faster than pressure ever could. And as you embody this timing, your sense of self stretches beyond biography, beyond memory, beyond even spiritual identity, and you begin to feel yourself as a continuity rather than a character, a stream of awareness flowing through this lifetime rather than originating in it. And this dissolves fear at its root, because fear depends on the illusion of isolated existence, and once that illusion collapses, survival gives way to participation, and participation unlocks a deeper intimacy with life itself, and you find yourself listening more than speaking, sensing more than asserting, allowing rather than striving, and paradoxically this allowance amplifies your impact, because systems reorganize most efficiently when met without distortion. And here the collective field begins to respond more visibly, not through miracles or spectacle, but through subtle shifts in probability. Conflicts resolving without escalation, opportunities aligning without pursuit, insights arriving precisely when needed, and you recognize this as quantum reality, stabilizing around your coherence, not because you control it, but because you are no longer interfering with it, and this realization dissolves the final residue of separation between spiritual experience and daily life. Because there is no longer a boundary between meditation and movement, intention and action, inner world and outer expression, and everything becomes practice simply by being lived consciously. And yet even here, a final challenge arises, the temptation to conclude, to define this state as a rival, to crystallize the story into meaning. And this is where Arcturian wisdom gently intervenes, reminding you that consciousness stagnates when it claims completion, and so instead of ending, you soften, allowing openness to remain your primary orientation, and this openness keeps evolution alive, fluid, responsive, and as you stand here, fully present in this moment, you realize that the long arc of awakening was never about escaping density or transcending humanity, but about becoming trustworthy with awareness, capable of holding truth without weaponizing it, capable of seeing without withdrawing, capable of loving without losing center, and this trustworthiness is the true initiation, the threshold you cross not with ceremony, but with consistency, choice by choice, breath by breath, until the extraordinary dissolved into the ordinary and revealed itself as sacred all along. And so the story completes itself not with an ending, but with a settling, a deep integration where nothing feels unfinished because nothing is being chased. And this is the final recognition of the starseed path. You were never here to awaken away from the world, but to awaken within it so completely that the distinction dissolves. And now as you move through life, through work and rest, connection and solitude, uncertainty and clarity, you do so with an unshakable sense of participation, knowing that every moment of presence subtly reinforces the architecture of a new reality forming beneath the old one, and this reality does not announce itself through revolution or collapse alone, but through regulated nervous systems, conscious choices, and individuals who can hold complexity without fragmentation, and you are one of them. Not because you are special, but because you are aligned, and alignment is rare only because it requires honesty, patience, and the willingness to remain awake even when sleep would be easier. And as you embody this alignment, the Arcturian message completes its transmission, no longer as guidance but as resonance, no longer as instruction but as lived intelligence. and you understand now why the journey unfolded as it did, why forgetting was necessary, why longing was intense, why the awakening arrived through disruption rather than comfort, because only through compression could capacity be built, and only through capacity could this level of consciousness stabilize within form, and as this understanding settles, gratitude arises not as emotion but as orientation, a steady appreciation for the complexity of existence, for the privilege of awareness, for the opportunity to participate in a pivotal moment of planetary evolution, and this gratitude anchors you further, making your presence nourishing rather than consuming, supportive rather than extractive, and from this place you no longer fear the future or romanticize the past, because you understand that time is not a threat but a medium through which consciousness expresses itself, and you are fluent in that medium now, moving with it rather than against it. And as the story gently releases you back into your life, there is no dramatic farewell, no final instruction, only a quiet knowing that what you sought has become how you live, and that the greatest activation was never hidden in the stars or encoded in distant messages, but emerged naturally the moment you chose to meet reality without distortion. And this is the end of the story only because it has become something else entirely, not a narrative to follow, but a way of being that continues unfolding long after the words fall silent.